You're listening to the Sex and Psychology Podcast, the sex ed you never got in school and won't get anywhere else. I am your host, Dr. Justin Lehmiller. I am a social psychologist and research fellow at the Kinsey Institute and author of the book, Tell Me What You Want, The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help You Improve Your Sex Life. GLP-1 medications are becoming enormously popular for weight loss, and they are dramatically reshaping healthcare. However, their effects extend far beyond this. Medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, and Zepbound are also transforming our intimate lives. As we'll discuss in today's show, a new national study recently found that nearly 60% of GLP-1 users say the medication has changed their dating lives, and more than half say it has changed their sex life too. And these changes aren't subtle. People are reporting more confidence, more matches, more dates, and in some cases, they're hearing from ex-partners who suddenly want to reconnect. But the story is complicated. These drugs don't affect everyone the same way. For example, while some users report major boosts in their sexual desire and function, others are experiencing the opposite. So we're going to explore why that is. There are also some fascinating gender differences in how these drugs are reshaping intimacy that we're going to dive into as well. Additionally, we're going to talk about the stigma and controversy surrounding GLP-1 medications in general and how that's factoring into this too. My guest is Dr. Amanda Gesselman, a research scientist and head of the Vibes research team at the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. Digital intimacy is a major focus of her research, including how people use tools like campsites, AI companions, dating apps, and social media to navigate connection and desire. This is going to be another fascinating conversation. Stick around and we're going to jump in right after the break. If you love the science of sex as much as I do, consider becoming a friend of the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. The Kinsey Institute is the world's premier research organization on sex and relationships, and you can help them continue the legacy of Dr. Alfred Kinsey, whose pioneering research changed everything we think we know about sex. Visit kinseyinstitute.org to make an impact. Your donations can help support ongoing research projects on critical topics. You can also show your support by following Kinsey Institute on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you for supporting sex science. Hi, Amanda, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. So in today's show, we're going to be diving into some brand new Kinsey Institute data that you and I collected earlier this year. We conducted a demographically representative survey of 2,000 single American adults in partnership with datingadvice.com to look at the modern state of sex, love, and intimacy. And one of the topics we asked people about was how popular weight loss medications are changing sex and dating. And specifically, we were looking at the impact of GLP-1 drugs like Wegovy and Zepbound. And we found that nearly 1 in 10 singles said they'd taken one of those medications specifically for weight loss. So we asked those folks a ton of questions about what the resulting impact has been on their intimate lives. So let's dive in. Now, one of the things we found was that 59% of GLP-1 users said that the medication had changed their dating lives in some way, which is a pretty striking number. So can you talk to us a little bit about what kinds of changes people were reporting? How did these drugs change their dating lives?
Absolutely. So the top way that people reported that GLP-1s have impacted their dating lives or their sexual lives, as you might expect, is first and foremost body confidence. So people were telling us that they were buying new outfits to show off their body. They were posting new photos on dating apps to, show off their new figure and sort of advertise how good they're feeling about themselves these days. So that was the top way. And then we also saw quite a few people reporting some more sexual side effects. So we saw a rise in libido. We also saw some decrease in libido and just some general improvements in their sexual functioning or declines for some people as well.
Yeah, and we'll get into the sexual findings more a little bit later. But in terms of some of the things with dating that we saw, there were a lot of people who said, I feel better about my body, so I'm taking new photos, I'm buying new clothes. There were also several who said they're going on more dates, that they are getting more matches when they're on dating apps, and also some who said that they're even hearing from exes or former partners who now suddenly want to reconnect for some reason. So what do you think is driving all of these changes? Is it about weight loss leading to more self-confidence and improved body image? Or is it about a change in the way that other people see you? We know that there's a lot of weight stigma that's out there. And while that seemed to have faded somewhat in recent years, we had this body positivity movement that was going on. It seems like that's kind of rebounded a bit in the wake of GLP-1 drugs and how they've become so popular. So what do you think's going on here? What's driving the changes?
I do think it's a mix of things. So, for people who are on GLP 1s who have started to lose weight, maybe after years or decades of trying and not being able to get the type of body that they wish they had or they want to see themselves as, I think losing weight and being that person that they'd hoped they could be in the mirror has certainly spiked confidence for them. And confidence is sexy. I think we can all agree that someone who feels confident in their body is attractive. They have a glow. They look happy. They look appealing, right? And so I think there's something to be said for that, especially for people who are, taking photos, posting, their new happy self online, if that's how they feel. I think that has quite a lot of potential to draw in new matches, new partners. But on the flip side, I do think that there's also something to be said for the weight stigma in our culture. I think there's a lot of fat phobia. And I do think that with the introduction of GLP-1s on the market, we have seen a bit of a backslide into a louder valuing of thinner bodies. And so I think that both internally and externally, people are reacting to that, both people on GLP-1s and the people around them. So I think it makes sense for them to be getting more attention, both confidence-wise and because of how society reacts to thinner people. Both of those things might be explaining more matches and also ex-partners reaching out to them.
Yeah, totally. Now, one of the most surprising findings is that men were 3 times more likely than women to feel more confident in their appearance after taking GLP-1 medications. Men were also twice as likely to report that they were going on more dates. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts on what might be driving this gender gap. Like, why might weight loss seem to be benefiting men more than women in terms of getting more dates?
I think the story around men here is really interesting. So, for one, in our culture, compliments are, I want to say exclusively, but pretty heavily given to women over men, right? So men might get complimented on their competence or the way that they've done a job. But when we talk about complimenting the way that someone looks, their body, their fashion choices, what have you, men don't often get many of those. And so a compliment on a man's body makes a difference when they're not really getting that from anywhere else and they haven't gotten that in years or maybe ever. So I think that for men, even if they're losing in a sort of equal proportion of weight to women, the way that people are now reacting to them feels stronger than it might feel for women because they're just not used to that kind of positive attention to their appearance. And in terms of them getting more matches on dating apps, a lot of research shows that men are just less likely than women to get matches, to get messages, to get people who are interested in them. Any increase, even if to a woman it might seem minute or maybe they don't even notice it, I think for men, any increase feels big and feels substantial. So all of a sudden, they're posting these new photos of themselves online. They're getting a little bit of attention. They're getting even one more match than they're used to can feel really important to them. So I think that might be what we're seeing in the data.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, if you look at data on how often men versus women match on an app like Tinder, the average female profile, according to some studies, matches about 1 in every 10 times versus the average male profile matches less than 1 in 100 times, right? And so even if you're getting just one extra match, like that might be twice as many as you were getting before. And so proportionally, it feels like a huge increase, even though on paper, like, technically you're not getting a ton of matches, but it is a big increase over the kind of engagement that you were getting before. So I think that is certainly a big part of what's going on here. I think too, we can think about this through the lens of just how men's and women's bodies have traditionally been judged in our culture and how there is so much more scrutiny on women's bodies than men's bodies. And I think when women undergo significant weight loss, sometimes it doesn't yield the greater body confidence that they were hoping for because then there becomes like a new problem or issue. Let's say in some cases, if you lose a ton of weight, there might be sagging skin. And so then that might become the new source of body image anxiety for them. And maybe that's more likely to be the case for women just because there's that higher level of scrutiny on women's bodies. And I think too, there could also be just something here that's due to sex differences just in terms of how these drugs affect people's bodies. And I've seen some research finding that women are more likely to experience negative side effects of these drugs compared to men. And so that might also be translating to some of these implications for their dating lives, because if you're just not feeling as good, then that might also make you be less likely to want to go out there and date. So I think, it's probably a really complicated story, and there's not like just one thing going on here, but it's certainly an interesting one. And I think one that maybe a lot of people necessarily wouldn't have expected.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just don't know enough right now about the ways that those medications interact with hormones like estrogen and testosterone, things like that. And also what creates these individual trajectories for people. So, you and I could both be taking the same GLP-1 drug, and you might lose a significant amount of weight, whereas it's much slower for me, or vice versa. That can make people feel inadequate or feel bad if their body's not responding to the drug in the same way, or if they're having terrible side effects, gastric paralysis, those sorts of things that can really make you feel bad physically as well as mentally. And especially if women are experiencing those more often, I can see why we might see more positive reports from men in our sample than we saw from women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think adding even further complexity to this, just based on my own anecdotal experience of people I know who have been taking these drugs, it seems like some people who start them just want to lose as much weight as quickly as possible. And that can change your appearance in a negative way, because then you start losing muscle mass. If you're not prioritizing fitness and nutrition and things like that along the way, your body's going to start burning that muscle first. And that can lead to the, sort of gaunt face look and, other changes in your body that just might transform it in a way that you see as being less attractive later on, right? And by contrast, I know other people on these drugs who are going to the gym all the time, and they're really prioritizing protein and building muscle and all these other things. And so their body's transforming in a really different way. So I think, the way that people take these drugs and the way that they prioritize and approach fitness and nutrition is going to matter a lot here too, when it comes to things like how they feel about themselves, how it affects their dating life and their sex life, and so forth. So lots happening here. But these drugs, as we said, aren't just changing people's dating lives. More than half of GLP-1 users in our sample reported changes in their sex lives too. But it wasn't affecting everybody the same way. We saw pretty similar numbers of people who said they experienced increased desire as who experienced decreased desire for sex. So how do we make sense of those opposing outcomes? Why might these drugs and why might weight loss stimulate more desire in some people, but less desire in others?
I think this is another situation where these drugs are just so new, and there's so little that we know about them right now in terms of how they impact these underlying hormones and things like that for people. And so I do think that once we have a bit more scientific research in that area, we'll know a bit more. But I think there are some other explanations that we could point to. So in our data, we did find that men in particular were more likely to have these effects in both directions. So they were more likely to have the positive effects and more likely to have the negative effects compared to women. And it's possible that men in our sample who were experiencing particularly the negative side effects, so a reduced libido, it's possible that those men were taking GLP-1s in an effort to improve their intimate lives. So maybe these men felt that something about the way that their body felt or looked was, inhibiting them from having sex with partners or matching with partners to have an intimate relationship. And then if that doesn't pan out, if they're not feeling as good as they thought they would in their new body, then that can create a sort of negative perception. Whereas on the other hand, if that wasn't the goal for men, or if they are experiencing what they hope to experience in terms of, intimate relationships with others, they might be more likely to report it. So I think there's just a lot of individual variability here that we, as a scientific community, haven't quite captured why people are on these drugs, what it is they're expecting, and how their outcomes measure up to that.
Yeah. And I think that's an important point about the expectations versus the reality. A lot of people who are taking these drugs are expecting or hoping for a huge amount of weight loss and this dramatic transformation in terms of how they feel about themselves and how other people see them. And if those results don't materialize, that can be not just really disappointing, it can also be devastating, especially if you're somebody who's been trying to lose weight for a really long time and you see all these other people losing weight with these drugs and then it's not happening for you. Yeah, I mean, so the expectations piece is really crucial here. And I think it is important for people who are using these medications to go in with realistic expectations, not expect that your journey is going to be exactly the same as everybody else's, because how a given drug interacts with your body is going to be unique to you. Everybody's experience is always going to be a little bit different. What do you learn when you track 136,000 erections? A heck of a lot. And FirmTech is using that breakthrough data to transform men's sexual health. Here's why that matters. ED is usually treated by guesswork, but FirmTech's Tech Ring finally gives men and their doctors real data. How firm you're getting, how long you're staying there, whether your medications are working, and whether things like pumps, PRP, or shockwave therapy will actually do anything for you. It can even help optimize your dosing for ED meds, and they've got the science to back all of this up. But my favorite part is that the Tech Ring doesn't just measure erections, it improves them. FirmTech's design helps keep more blood in the penis, giving you harder erections, more confidence, and more intense orgasms. In fact, studies show that for certain men, it performs on par with taking 10 milligrams of tadalafil. Remember, pills help get blood in, rings help keep it there. And FirmTech's database revealed something big. For most guys, fading erections aren't dysfunction, they're venous leak. You get hard, and then you lose it. The Tech Ring can spot that early, long before you consciously notice it. It can also flag cardiovascular-related ED, which is the kind that you really want to pay attention to. The bottom line is that we're all somewhere on the spectrum from erectile fitness to erectile dysfunction. FirmTech gives you the tools and the data to stop or even reverse that trend. Check the show notes for the link and save 15% off your FirmTech order by using Justin15 as the discount code. Stay fit, stay firm. Now, it is interesting, right, that men were reporting more of these effects, both positive and negative, on their sex lives. And something else we saw in the data was that men who were taking these drugs were about twice as likely to have been sexually active as women. And so part of the story, too, could just be that men were having more sex, and so they had more opportunities to notice sexual side effects, whether they're positive or negative. But that also kind of made me wonder if maybe men and women are taking these drugs for different reasons in the first place, right? So I wonder if maybe guys are more likely to take these drugs specifically because they're looking for a boost in their intimate life. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier about men getting fewer matches when they're engaged in online dating. Maybe they're more likely to turn to anything that's just going to give them a leg up, which could be weight loss medications or using AI, which was another thing we asked about in the survey. Guys are way more likely to turn to AI for help with dating. So I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's a good point. I think there's a lot of research out there about the ways that men try to make themselves more appealing on the dating market, like, a better competitor, you could say. And I think that GLP-1 marketing has really shown in a lot of the commercials and the advertising materials, like, there are couples in the videos. There are people who look very happy and they're holding hands and, embracing one another. It definitely has a bit of a romantic leaning marketing, I should say. So I think that it's totally possible that people are, especially men, are taking this to get a leg up on the competition, to improve their dating lives. Whereas for women, many of them might be doing the same, but it might also be more self-focused. So women might be taking this to feel better about themselves, whereas men are taking it more to connect with others intimately. And that might be one explanation for what we've seen in our data.
Yeah. And we also saw in the data that women were more likely than men to be voluntarily celibate right now, to be taking a break from sex. And the single most common reason that women reported for engaging in voluntary celibacy was because they were on a journey of self-improvement. And sometimes that also included a weight loss journey. It wasn't always about weight loss. There are lots of ways we can work on improving ourselves, but there could be something to that there, that maybe for women, it's more something about them and self-improvement, whereas for men, maybe it's more about developing that sexual, intimate, or romantic connection. We also know that men don't have a lot of other sources of social support in their lives outside of their romantic relationships. And so to the extent that losing weight might open the door to having a connection or relationship, that could be really transformative, not just for your sex life, but also just for having your social, emotional, and intimate needs met.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe men are taking GLP-1s to reverse the loneliness epidemic, you know?
Maybe. So something to ask about in our next survey.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, when it came to changes in people's sex lives, it wasn't just sexual desire where they were noticing a change. It was also changes in sexual function. So, for example, if you think about something like arousal, there were some people who were reporting that it's easier to become aroused, and some people who were reporting it's more difficult. And that lines up with what I've seen in the broader literature on this topic. I mean, there's not a lot out there, but it's full of these contradictory findings where some saying, for example, that GLP-1 drugs are linked to higher rates of erectile dysfunction, and other studies saying that no, it actually improves erectile function. And so again, it's in that realm of contradictory findings. And I think, again, it's a complicated answer here. I think hormones play a key role in this. Like if you're losing a lot of weight really quickly, that's going to throw your hormones out of whack. And that could make it harder to become aroused or to experience sexual desire. But if you're losing weight at a more reasonable pace and you end up at a healthy weight, then that can put your hormones in higher gear, or and that's going to support more desire and arousal. And so it's kind of hard to say like there's just one effect, because there's so many variables that aren't controlled in these studies, because it's not just taking the drug, it's how quickly are you losing weight. Are you taking other drugs like antidepressants or other things at the same time? How are all these drugs interacting with your own body? How is your body image changing? Are you developing saggy skin, or are you putting on more muscle? I know people like simple and easy stories, but I think the story of this drug is just one of very complex effects.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of this does remind me of what we know about the ways antidepressants impact people's sex lives or even their ability to have romantic feelings. A lot of people do experience erectile dysfunction or the inability to orgasm or just lower libido when they're taking antidepressants. But on the flip side, a lot of people feel the opposite when they take antidepressants. It relieves their mental anxieties. It relieves, obviously, their depressed state, and that leaves more room for them to feel intimately connected to their partner, to have a sex drive, to enjoy sex, etc. And so I think that what we're seeing with GLP-1s in some ways mirrors that, where it's hard to know exactly how it's going to play out for any individual person. There's a lot of variability. There are a lot of people who really benefit and a lot of people who really struggle. And it's hard scientifically to know which camp any individual person is going to fall in, unfortunately. I think there's still a lot to be done, but I think that one thing that we might all forget about people who are taking GLP-1s is that it's marketed as this sort of magic pill that magically makes you lose all this weight that you haven't been able to get off. But there are still lots of things that people who take these medications have to do and think about. You have to make sure that your diet is still good, that you're taking care of your body in that kind of way. You have to think about the ways that your muscle mass is degrading or atrophying as you're losing all of this weight. Both of those things are very important to keeping a healthy body, especially as you age, particularly for women. And I think a lot of those things aren't really mentioned in the media discourse around this, or maybe even mentioned at the doctor's office when people are talking to clinicians about this. But both of those things have the potential to, I think, probably really make or break the situation in a lot of ways. So I think there's a lot to be studied still, but I do think there's this sort of individual variability that would be very valuable for us to get a grasp on.
Yes, we need more data. Now, something else that was really interesting in our study was that a lot of people reported being worried about being judged for taking a GLP-1 drug. And again, there was a gender gap, but it might surprise some people. So specifically, our data showed that 60% of men who were taking GLP-1s were worried about being judged for using that medication, compared to only 35% of women who said the same thing. So certainly a lot of people are worried that other people are going to judge them for using these meds. But why do you think that is? And why do you think men are especially concerned about this?
This really surprised me because I am on social media way too often. And anytime a celebrity shows up looking thinner than they used to look, a lot of the comments are about, this person must be on Ozempic. But I don't think I've ever seen that comment on a picture of a man. It's always female celebrities or women celebrities. And every single time, it's always like Ozempic or Wegovy claims. But for men, I think people just assume they went to the gym. there's very little Ozempic talk around famous men for some reason. So that was really interesting for me to see that in our data set, men are really the ones that are most concerned about judgment. I think there might be a few explanations, one of which I think you pointed out back when we were first going through this data, which is that for men, using a pill to lose weight might be seen as like taking the easy way out or sort of taking a cheat code rather than doing it the quote unquote like real way or the masculine way of doing things, like going to the gym and getting strong and changing your body in the expected way for men. So I think that might be one reason that men are worried that they might be judged. They've sort of taken the anti-masculine route to get there, whereas women don't necessarily have that to worry about. I do think that for both parties, it's pretty clear that our society is both leaning into GLP-1s and also judging them pretty heavily, which is an interesting juxtaposition to see. So I do think both genders, all genders, are probably on the receiving end of some negative feedback about their new bodies. But it is interesting to me that men seem to be taking that more to heart.
Yeah, I think it's totally a masculinity threat for a lot of these guys who are worried about being judged is that, if other people were to find out, especially other men, that they use these medications to achieve weight loss or transform their body, that, yeah, they would be accused of taking the easy way out. And I think that gets to the broader stigma that exists against these drugs, and if you go on social media and you look at any discussion about GLP-1 drugs, it is such a polarizing discussion that you're going to see. You're going to see like half of responses that are like, these drugs are great. They're amazing. They're life-changing. They're giving people their lives back and helping them to build confidence and become healthier. And then you've got the other half that's like, these drugs are cheating, right? Nobody should be taking them. We don't know enough about the long-term effects. And there's all kinds of things. Like it's a laundry list of complaints that people have about them. And so why do you think this is such a polarizing topic of discussion?
I think weight in general is a hugely polarizing topic of discussion. I think that people are constantly concerned with the way that other people's bodies look and the way that their own bodies look as well. I think that our media and just the general cultural storytelling that we have here is really focused on how people look and especially keeping people thin and sort of putting that kind of body on a pedestal. And so I think that anything around weight or weight loss or the ways that people might look always has the potential to create a highly volatile comment section, unfortunately. I do think it's interesting that we really went through this set of years about body positivity and, being proud to be fat or be thicker than the average person. And now we're sort of swinging back. I think that's an interesting thing to watch as a scientist, to see the ways that people are swinging back and forth between those trends. But yeah, I think that as a group, we are very invested in how everyone, including ourselves, looks. And so people are very upset when there's something that seems relatively easy in terms of making a switch to a different body, especially people who might not be able to access those or, might have a health condition that keeps them from being able to safely take it. There's a lot of hate from lots of groups about it right now.
It's a great point that there's a much bigger conversation to be had here about the way that we just judge and are hypercritical of other people's appearances, especially on social media. And there's a lot of criticism over people who are perceived to be doing anything that isn't quote unquote natural to their bodies, right? So taking a GLP-1 drug is cheating, getting plastic surgery is cheating, getting a hair transplant or taking a hair loss medication, whatever. Like all kinds of people consider this to be cheating, right? That your appearance should be natural and that you should embrace your look for what it is. And if you're going to improve it, you need to improve it the old-fashioned way through diet and exercise and these other kinds of things. And so I think, yeah, that's probably part of what is going on here and why this is such a polarizing topic and why I don't think that the stigma and the polarization is going to go away anytime soon, because it's connected to some broader macro trends here. This also has me thinking about like all of these videos that occasionally pop up in my reels where you have these doctors who are analyzing, well, did this celebrity get plastic surgery? And here's what I think is going on. And they're like breaking down like different aspects of their face and saying, look at this thing right above their ear. That means they had I was going to say face transplant, but that's not a thing. I was going to say they had a facelift. Yeah, not like the movie Face Off. We live in a weird time is all I could say.
I mean, even filters, people get really up in arms in the comment sections about whether or not an influencer is using filters, right, on their face or making their body thinner, what have you. I think we are just hyper focused on the ways that other people look, and especially making sure that they're not taking some easy way out to look, better than us or to look ideal.
Yeah. But wouldn't it be nice if we could just go about our business and not judge other people's choices?
Yes. And not be judged for ours.
Yes. Would be nice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Amanda. I'm looking forward to continuing it in the next episode and diving deeper into some of our fascinating findings from our recent study on sex and dating. Can you please tell my listeners where they can go to learn more about you and your work and also to stay up to date with the Kinsey Institute?
Yes. So the Kinsey Institute has a website, kinseyinstitute.org, where you can read about my research. You can also read about Justin's research there. Keep apprised of any events or new articles or what have you. We're also at Kinsey Institute on all social media. And I do have a website that I try to keep pretty well updated, which is just amandagesselman.com.
Well, I'll be sure to include links to all of that in the show notes. Thank you again so much for your time. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. To keep up with new episodes of this podcast, visit my website, Sex and Psychology, at sexandpsychology.com, or subscribe on your favorite platform, where I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please consider becoming a Sex and Psychology Premium subscriber to enjoy ad-free listening for just $3.99 a month. You can also follow me on social media for daily sex research updates. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Justin Lehmiller and Instagram at Justin J. Lehmiller. Also, be sure to check out my book, Tell Me What You Want. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.